For these reasons I decline to take any but a strong and healthy pupil, and these are my principles for keeping him in health. I will not stop to prove at length the value of manual labor and bodily exercise for strengthening the health and constitution. No one denies it. Nearly all the instances of long life are to be found among the men who have taken most exercise, who have endured fatigue and labor. Footnote: I cannot help quoting the following passage from an English newspaper, as it throws much light on my opinions. A certain Patrick O'Neill, born in 1647, has just married his seventh wife in 1760. In the 17th year of Charles II. He served in the dragoons and in other regiments up to 1740, when he took his discharge. He served in all the campaigns of William III and Marlborough. This man has never drunk anything but small beer, he has always lived on vegetables, and has never eaten meat except on few occasions when he made a feast for his relations. He has always been accustomed to rise with the sun and go to bed at sunset unless prevented by his military duties. He is now in his 130th year, he is healthy, his hearing is good, and he walks with the help of a stick. In spite of his great age he is never idle, and every Sunday he goes to his parish church accompanied by his children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. Neither will I enter into details as to the care I shall take for this alone. It will be clear that it forms such an essential part of my practice that it is enough to get hold of the idea without further explanation. When our life begins, our needs begin too. The newborn infant must have a nurse. If his mother will do her duty, so much the better. Her instructions will be given her in writing, but this advantage has its drawbacks: it removes the tutor from his charge. But it is to be hoped that the child's own interests, and her respect for the person to whom she is about to confide so precious a treasure, will induce the mother to follow the master's wishes, and whatever she does you may be sure she will do better than another. If we must have a strange nurse, make a good choice to begin with. It is one of the misfortunes of the rich to be cheated on all sides. What wonder they think ill of mankind? It is riches that corrupt men, and the rich are rightly the first to feel the defects of the only tool they know. Everything is ill done for them, except what they do themselves, and they do next to nothing. When a nurse must be selected, the choice is left to the doctor. What happens? The best nurse is the one who offers the highest bribe. I shall not consult the doctor about Emile's nurse, I shall take care to choose her myself. I may not argue about it so elegantly as the surgeon, but I shall be more reliable, I shall be less deceived by my zeal than the doctor by his greed. There is no mystery about this choice, its rules are well known, but I think we ought probably to pay more attention to the age of the milk as well as its quality. The first milk is watery, it must be almost an aperient, to purge the remains of the meconium curdled in the bowels of the newborn child. Little by little the milk thickens and supplies more solid food as the child is able to digest it. It is surely not without cause that nature changes the milk in the female of every species according to the age of the offspring. Thus a newborn child requires a nurse who has recently become mother. There is, I know, a difficulty here, but as soon as we leave the path of nature there are difficulties in the way of all well-doing. The wrong course is the only right one under the circumstances, so we take it. The nurse must be healthy alike in disposition and in body. The violence of the passions as well as the humors may spoil her milk. Moreover, to consider the body only is to keep only half our aim in view. The milk may be good and the nurse bad. A good character is as necessary as a good constitution. If you choose a vicious person, I do not say her foster child will acquire her vices, but he will suffer for them. Ought she not to bestow on him day by day, along with her milk, a care which calls for zeal, patience, gentleness, and cleanliness? If she is intemperate and greedy, her milk will soon be spoilt. If she is careless and hasty, what will become of a poor little wretch left to her mercy, and unable either to protect himself or to complain? The wicked are never good for anything. The choice is all the more important because her foster child should have no other guardian, just as he should have no teacher but his tutor. This was the custom of the ancients, who talked less but acted more wisely than we. The nurse never left her foster daughter, this is why the nurse is the confidant in most of their plays. A child who passes through many hands in turn, can never be well brought up. At every change he makes a secret comparison, which continually tends to lessen his respect for those who control him, and with it their authority over him. If once he thinks there are grown-up people with no more sense than children, the authority of age is destroyed and his education is ruined. A child should know no betters but its father and mother, or failing them its foster mother and its tutor, and even this is one too many, but this division is inevitable, and the best that can be done in the way of remedy is that the man and woman who control him shall be so well agreed with regard to him that they seem like one.
You're listening Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. TheAppleClean audiobooks.
The nurse must live rather more comfortably, she must have rather more substantial food, but her whole way of living must not be altered, for a sudden change, even a change for the better, is dangerous to health, and since her usual way of life has made her healthy and strong, why change it? Country women eat less meat and more vegetables than townswomen, and this vegetarian diet seems favorable rather than otherwise to themselves and their children. When they take nurslings from the upper classes, they eat meat and broth with the idea that they will form better chyle and supply more milk. I do not hold with this at all, and experience is on my side, for we do not find children fed in this way less liable to colic and worms. That need not surprise us, for decaying animal matter swarms with worms, but this is not the case with vegetable matter. Footnote: women eat bread, vegetables, and dairy produce, female dogs and cats do the same, the she-wolves eat grass. This supplies vegetable juices to their milk. There are still those species which are unable to eat anything but flesh, if such there are, which I very much doubt. Milk, although manufactured in the body of an animal, is a vegetable substance, this is shown by analysis, it readily turns acid, and far from showing traces of any volatile alkali like animal matter, it gives a neutral salt like plants. The milk of herbivorous creatures is sweeter and more wholesome than the milk of the carnivorous, formed of a substance similar to its own, it keeps its goodness and becomes less liable to putrefaction. If quantity is considered, it is well known that farinaceous foods produce more blood than meat, so they ought to yield more milk. If a child were not weaned too soon, and if it were fed on vegetarian food, and its foster mother were a vegetarian, I do not think it would be troubled with worms. Milk derived from vegetable foods may perhaps be more liable to go sour, but I am far from considering sour milk an unwholesome food. Whole nations have no other food and are none the worse, and all the array of absorbents seems to me mere humbug. There are constitutions which do not thrive on milk, others can take it without absorbents. People are afraid of the milk separating or curdling, that is absurd, for we know that milk always curdles in the stomach. This is how it becomes sufficiently solid to nourish children and young animals. If it did not curdle, it would merely pass away without feeding them. Footnote: although the juices which nourish us are liquid, they must be extracted from solids. A hard-working man who ate nothing but soup would soon waste away. He would be far better fed on milk, just because it curdles. In vain you dilute milk and use absorbents. Whoever swallows milk digests cheese. This rule is without exception. Rennet is made from a calf's stomach. Instead of changing the nurse's usual diet, I think it would be enough to give food in larger quantities and better of its kind. It is not the nature of the food that makes a vegetable diet indigestible, but the flavoring that makes it unwholesome. Reform your cookery, use neither butter nor oil for frying. Butter, salt, and milk should never be cooked. Let your vegetables be cooked in water and only seasoned when they come to table. The vegetable diet, far from disturbing the nurse, will give her a plentiful supply of milk. Footnote: those who wish to study a full account of the advantages and disadvantages of the Pythagorean regime, may consult the works of Dr. Cocchi and his opponent Dr. Bianchi on this important subject. If a vegetable diet is best for the child, how can meat food be best for his nurse? The things are contradictory. Fresh air affects children's constitutions, particularly in early years. It enters every pore of a soft and tender skin, it has a powerful effect on their young bodies. Its effects can never be destroyed. So I should not agree with those who take a country woman from her village and shut her up in one room in a town and her nursling with her. I would rather send him to breathe the fresh air of the country than the foul air of the town. He will take his new mother's position, will live in her cottage, where his tutor will follow him. The reader will bear in mind that this tutor is not a paid servant, but the father's friend. But if this friend cannot be found, if this transfer is not easy, if none of my advice can be followed, you will say to me, what shall I do instead? I have told you already, do what you are doing, no advice is needed there. Men are not made to be crowded together in ant hills, but scattered over the earth to till it. The more they are massed together, the more corrupt they become. Disease and vice are the sure results of overcrowded cities. Of all creatures man is least fitted to live in herds. Huddled together like sheep, men would very soon die. Man's breath is fatal to his fellows. This is literally as well as figuratively true. Men are devoured by our towns. In a few generations the race dies out or becomes degenerate, it needs renewal, and it is always renewed from the country. Send your children to renew themselves, so to speak, send them to regain in the open fields the strength lost in the foul air of our crowded cities. Women hurry home that their children may be born in the town, they ought to do just the opposite, especially those who mean to nurse their own children. They would lose less than they think, and in more natural surroundings the pleasures associated by nature with maternal duties would soon destroy the taste for other delights.
You're listening Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The AppleClean audiobooks.
The newborn infant is first bathed in warm water to which a little wine is usually added. I think the wine might be dispensed with. As nature does not produce fermented liquors, it is not likely that they are of much value to her creatures. In the same way it is unnecessary to take the precaution of heating the water, in fact among many races the newborn infants are bathed with no more ado in rivers or in the sea. Our children, made tender before birth by the softness of their parents, come into the world with a constitution already enfeebled, which cannot be at once exposed to all the trials required to restore it to health. Little by little they must be restored to their natural vigor. Begin then by following this custom, and leave it off gradually. Wash your children often, their dirty ways show the need of this. If they are only wiped their skin is injured, but as they grow stronger gradually reduce the heat of the water, till at last you bathe them winter and summer in cold, even in ice-cold water. To avoid risk this change must be slow, gradual, and imperceptible, so you may use the thermometer for exact measurements. This habit of the bath, once established, should never be broken off, it must be kept up all through life. I value it not only on grounds of cleanliness and present health, but also as a wholesome means of making the muscles supple, and accustoming them to bear without risk or effort extremes of heat and cold. As he gets older I would have the child trained to bathe occasionally in hot water of every bearable degree, and often in every degree of cold water. Now water being a denser fluid touches us at more points than air, so that, having learned to bear all the variations of temperature in water, we shall scarcely feel this of the air. Footnote: children in towns are stifled by being kept indoors and too much wrapped up. Those who control them have still to learn that fresh air, far from doing them harm, will make them strong, while hot air will make them weak, will give rise to fevers, and will eventually kill them. When the child draws its first breath, do not confine it in tight wrappings. No cap, no bandages, nor swaddling clothes. Loose and flowing flannel wrappers, which leave its limbs free and are not too heavy to check his movements, not too warm to prevent his feeling the air. Footnote: I say cradle using the common word for want of a better, though I am convinced that it is never necessary and often harmful to rock children in the cradle. Put him in a big cradle, well padded, where he can move easily and safely. As he begins to grow stronger, let him crawl about the room, let him develop and stretch his tiny limbs, you will see him gain strength from day to day. Compare him with a well-swaddled child of the same age and you will be surprised at their different rates of progress. Footnote: the ancient Peruvians wrapped their children in loose swaddling bands, leaving the arms quite free. Later they placed them unswaddled in a hole in the ground, lined with cloths, so that the lower part of the body was in the hole, and their arms were free and they could move the head and bend the body at will without falling or hurting themselves. When they began to walk they were enticed to come to the breast. The little Negroes are often in a position much more difficult for sucking. They cling to the mother's hip, and cling so tightly that the mother's arm is often not needed to support them. They clasp the breast with their hand and continue sucking while their mother goes on with her ordinary work. These children begin to walk at 2 months, or rather to crawl. Later on they can run on all fours almost as well as on their feet. Buffon M. Buffon might also have quoted the example of England, where the senseless and barbarous swaddling clothes have become almost obsolete. See The Long Journey of Siam, The Beautiful Travel to Canada, etc. You must expect great opposition from the nurses, who find a half-strangled baby needs much less watching. Besides, his dirtiness is more perceptible in an open garment, he must be attended to more frequently. Indeed, custom is an unanswerable argument in some lands and among all classes of people. Do not argue with the nurses, give your orders, see them carried out, and spare no pains to make the attention you prescribe easy in practice. Why not take your share in it? With ordinary nurslings, where the body alone is thought of, nothing matters so long as the child lives and does not actually die, but with us, when education begins with life, the newborn child is already a disciple, not of his tutor, but of nature. The tutor merely studies under this master, and sees that his orders are not evaded. He watches over the infant, he observes it, he looks for the first feeble glimmering of intelligence, as the Moslem looks for the moment of the moon's rising in her first quarter. We are born capable of learning, but knowing nothing, perceiving nothing. The mind, bound up within imperfect and half-grown organs, is not even aware of its own existence. The movements and cries of the newborn child are purely reflex, without knowledge or will.
You're listening Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. TheAppleClean audiobooks.
Suppose a child born with the size and strength of manhood, entering upon life full grown like Pallas from the brain of Jupiter, such a child man would be a perfect idiot, an automaton, a statue without motion and almost without feeling. He would see and hear nothing, he would recognize no one, he could not turn his eyes towards what he wanted to see. Not only would he perceive no external object, he would not even be aware of sensation through the several sense organs. His eye would not perceive color, his ear sounds, his body would be unaware of contact with neighboring bodies, he would not even know he had a body. What his hands handled would be in his brain alone, all his sensations would be united in one place, they would exist only in the common sensorium, he would have only one idea, that of self, to which he would refer all his sensations, and this idea, or rather this feeling, would be the only thing in which he excelled an ordinary child. This man, full grown at birth, would also be unable to stand on his feet, he would need a long time to learn how to keep his balance, perhaps he would not even be able to try to do it, and you would see the big strong body left in one place like a stone, or creeping and crawling like a young puppy. He would feel the discomfort of bodily needs without knowing what was the matter and without knowing how to provide for these needs. There is no immediate connection between the muscles of the stomach and those of the arms and legs to make him take a step towards food, or stretch a hand to seize it, even were he surrounded with it, and as his body would be full grown and his limbs well developed he would be without the perpetual restlessness and movement of childhood, so that he might die of hunger without stirring to seek food. However little you may have thought about the order and development of our knowledge, you cannot deny that such a one would be in the state of almost primitive ignorance and stupidity natural to man before he has learned anything from experience or from his fellows. We know then, or we may know, the point of departure from which we each start towards the usual level of understanding, but who knows the other extreme? Each progresses more or less according to his genius, his taste, his needs, his talents, his zeal, and his opportunities for using them. No philosopher, so far as I know, has dared to say to man, "Thus far shalt thou go and no further." We know not what nature allows us to be, none of us has measured the possible difference between man and man. Is there a mind so dead that this thought has never kindled it, that has never said in his pride, "How much have I already done, how much more may I achieve? Why should I lag behind my fellows?" As I said before, man's education begins at birth. Before he can speak or understand, he is learning. Experience precedes instruction. When he recognizes his nurse, he has learnt much. The knowledge of the most ignorant man would surprise us if we had followed his course from birth to the present time. If all human knowledge were divided into two parts, one common to all, the other peculiar to the learned, the latter would seem very small compared with the former. But we scarcely heed this general experience, because it is acquired before the age of reason. Moreover, knowledge only attracts attention by its rarity, as in algebraic equations common factors count for nothing. Even animals learn much. They have senses and must learn to use them, they have needs, they must learn to satisfy them, they must learn to eat, walk, or fly. Quadrupeds which can stand on their feet from the first cannot walk for all that. From their first attempts it is clear that they lack confidence. Canaries who escape from their cage are unable to fly, having never used their wings. Living and feeling creatures are always learning. If plants could walk, they would need senses and knowledge, else their species would die out. The child's first mental experiences are purely affective. He is only aware of pleasure and pain. It takes him a long time to acquire the definite sensations which show him things outside himself, but before these things present and withdraw themselves, so to speak, from his sight, taking size and shape for him, the recurrence of emotional experiences is beginning to subject the child to the rule of habit. You see his eyes constantly follow the light, and if the light comes from the side, the eyes turn towards it, so that one must be careful to turn his head towards the light lest he should squint. He must also be accustomed from the first to the dark, or he will cry if he misses the light. Food and sleep, too, exactly measured, become necessary at regular intervals, and soon desire is no longer the effect of need, but of habit, or rather habit adds a fresh need to those of nature. You must be on your guard against this. The only habit the child should be allowed to contract is that of having no habits. Let him be carried on either arm, let him be accustomed to offer either hand, to use one or other indifferently, let him not want to eat, sleep, or do anything at fixed hours, nor be unable to be left alone by day or night. Prepare the way for his control of his liberty and the use of his strength by leaving his body its natural habit, by making him capable of lasting self-control, of doing all that he wills when his will is formed.
You're listening Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. TheAppleClean audiobooks.
As soon as the child begins to take notice, what is shown him must be carefully chosen. The natural man is interested in all new things. He feels so feeble that he fears the unknown. The habit of seeing fresh things without ill effects destroys this fear. Children brought up in clean houses where there are no spiders are afraid of spiders, and this fear often lasts through life. I never saw peasants, man, woman, or child, afraid of spiders. Since the mere choice of things shown him may make the child timid or brave, why should not his education begin before he can speak or understand? I would have him accustomed to see fresh things, ugly, repulsive, and strange beasts, but little by little, and far off till he is used to them, and till having seen others handle them he handles them himself. If in childhood he sees toads, snakes, and crayfish, he will not be afraid of any animal when he is grown up. Those who are continually seeing terrible things think nothing of them. All children are afraid of masks. I begin by showing Emile a mask with a pleasant face, then someone puts this mask before his face, I begin to laugh, they all laugh too, and the child with them. By degrees I accustom him to less pleasing masks, and at last hideous ones. If I have arranged my stages skillfully, Far from being afraid of the last mask, he will laugh at it as he did at the first. After that I am not afraid of people frightening him with masks. When Hector bids farewell to Andromache, the young Astyanax, startled by the nodding plumes on the helmet, does not know his father, he flings himself weeping upon his nurse's bosom and wins from his mother a smile mingled with tears. What must be done to stay this terror? Just what Hector did, put the helmet on the ground and caress the child. In a calmer moment one would do more, one would go up to the helmet, play with the plumes, let the child feel them. At last the nurse would take the helmet and place it laughingly on her own head, if indeed a woman's hand dare touch the armor of Hector. If Emile must get used to the sound of a gun, I first fire a pistol with a small charge. He is delighted with this sudden flash, this sort of lightning. I repeat the process with more powder, gradually I add a small charge without a wad, then a larger. In the end I accustom him to the sound of a gun, to fireworks, cannon, and the most terrible explosions. I have observed that children are rarely afraid of thunder unless the peals are really terrible and actually hurt the ear, otherwise this fear only comes to them when they know that thunder sometimes hurts or kills. When reason begins to cause fear, let use reassure them. By slow and careful stages man and child learn to fear nothing. In the dawn of life, when memory and imagination have not begun to function, the child only attends to what affects its senses. His sense experiences are the raw material of thought, they should, therefore, be presented to him in fitting order, so that memory may at a future time present them in the same order to his understanding, but as he only attends to his sensations it is enough, at first, to show him clearly the connection between these sensations and the things which cause them. He wants to touch and handle everything, do not check these movements which teach him invaluable lessons. Thus he learns to perceive the heat, cold, hardness, softness, weight, or lightness of bodies, to judge their size and shape and all their physical properties, by looking, feeling. Footnote, of all the senses that of smell is the latest to develop in children up to 2 or 3 years of age they appear to be insensible of pleasant or unpleasant odors. In this respect they are as indifferent or rather as insensible as may animals. Listening, and, above all, by comparing sight and touch, by judging with the eye what sensation they would cause to his hand. It is only by movement that we learn the difference between self and not self, it is only by our own movements that we gain the idea of space. The child has not this idea, so he stretches out his hand to seize the object within his reach or that which is 100 paces from him. You take this as a sign of tyranny, an attempt to bid the thing draw near, or to bid you bring it. Nothing of the kind, it is merely that the object first seen in his brain, then before his eyes, now seems close to his arms, and he has no idea of space beyond his reach. Be careful, therefore, to take him about, to move him from place to place, and to let him perceive the change in his surroundings, so as to teach him to judge of distances. When he begins to perceive distances then you must change your plan, and only carry him when you please, not when he pleases, for as soon as he is no longer deceived by his senses, there is another motive for his effort. This change is remarkable and calls for explanation. The discomfort caused by real needs is shown by signs, when the help of others is required. Hence the cries of children, they often cry, it must be so. Since they are only conscious of feelings, when those feelings are pleasant they enjoy them in silence, when they are painful they say so in their own way and demand relief. Now when they are awake they can scarcely be in a state of indifference, either they are asleep or else they are feeling something.
You're listening Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The AppleClean audiobooks.
All our languages are the result of art. It has long been a subject of inquiry whether there ever was a natural language common to all. No doubt there is, and it is the language of children before they begin to speak. This language is inarticulate, but it has tone, stress, and meaning. The use of our own language has led us to neglect it so far as to forget it altogether. Let us study children and we shall soon learn it afresh from them. Nurses can teach us this language, they understand all their nurslings say to them, they answer them, and keep up long conversations with them, and though they use words, these words are quite useless. It is not the hearing of the word, but its accompanying intonation that is understood. To the language of intonation is added the no less forcible language of gesture. The child uses, not its weak hands, but its face. The amount of expression in these undeveloped faces is extraordinary, their features change from one moment to another with incredible speed. You see smiles, desires, terror, come and go like lightning, every time the face seems different. The muscles of the face are undoubtedly more mobile than our own. On the other hand, the eyes are almost expressionless. Such must be the sort of signs they use at an age when their only needs are those of the body. Grimaces are the sign of sensation, the glance expresses sentiment. As man's first state is one of want and weakness, his first sounds are cries and tears. The child feels his needs and cannot satisfy them, he begs for help by his cries. Is he hungry or thirsty? There are tears, is he too cold or too hot? More tears, he needs movement and is kept quiet, more tears, he wants to sleep and is disturbed, he weeps. The less comfortable he is, the more he demands change. He has only one language because he has, so to say, only one kind of discomfort. In the imperfect state of his sense organs he does not distinguish their several impressions, all ills produce one feeling of sorrow. These tears, which you think so little worthy of your attention, give rise to the first relation between man and his environment. Here is forged the first link in the long chain of social order. When the child cries he is uneasy, he feels some need which he cannot satisfy, you watch him, seek this need, find it, and satisfy it. If you can neither find it nor satisfy it, the tears continue and become tiresome. The child is petted to quiet him, he is rocked or sung to sleep. If he is obstinate, the nurse becomes impatient and threatens him, cruel nurses sometimes strike him. What strange lessons for him at his first entrance into life! I shall never forget seeing one of these troublesome crying children thus beaten by his nurse. He was silent at once. I thought he was frightened, and said to myself, this will be a servile being from whom nothing can be got but by harshness. I was wrong, the poor wretch was choking with rage, he could not breathe, he was black in the face. A moment later there were bitter cries, every sign of the anger, rage, and despair of this age was in his tones. I thought he would die. Had I doubted the innate sense of justice and injustice in man's heart, this one instance would have convinced me. I am sure that a drop of boiling liquid falling by chance on that child's hand would have hurt him less than that blow, slight in itself, but clearly given with the intention of hurting him. This tendency to anger, vexation, and rage needs great care. Boerhaave thinks that most of the diseases of children are of the nature of convulsions, because the head being larger in proportion and the nervous system more extensive than in adults, they are more liable to nervous irritation. Take the greatest care to remove from them any servants who tease, annoy, or vex them. They are 100-fold more dangerous and more fatal than fresh air and changing seasons. When children only experience resistance in things and never in the will of man, they do not become rebellious or passionate, and their health is better. This is one reason why the children of the poor, who are freer and more independent, are generally less frail and weakly, more vigorous than those who are supposed to be better brought up by being constantly thwarted, but you must always remember that it is one thing to refrain from thwarting them, but quite another to obey them. The child's first tears are prayers, beware lest they become command, he begins by asking for aid, he ends by demanding service. Thus from his own weakness, the source of his first consciousness of dependence, springs the later idea of rule and tyranny, but as this idea is aroused rather by his needs than by our services, we begin to see moral results whose causes are not in nature. Thus we see how important it is, even at the earliest age, to discern the secret meaning of the gesture or cry.
You're listening Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. TheAppleClean audiobooks.
When the child tries to seize something without speaking, he thinks he can reach the object, for he does not rightly judge its distance. When he cries and stretches out his hands, he no longer misjudges the distance, he bids the object approach, or orders you to bring it to him. In the first case, bring it to him slowly, in the second, do not even seem to hear his cries. The more he cries, the less you should heed him. He must learn in good time not to give commands to men, for he is not their master, nor to things, for they cannot hear him. Thus when the child wants something you mean to give him, it is better to carry him to it rather than to bring the thing to him. From this he will draw a conclusion suited to his age, and there is no other way of suggesting it to him. The Abbé Saint Pierre calls men big children, one might also call children little men. These statements are true, but they require explanation. But when Hobbes calls the wicked a strong child, his statement is contradicted by facts. All wickedness comes from weakness. The child is only naughty because he is weak, make him strong and he will be good. If we could do everything, we should never do wrong. Of all the attributes of the Almighty, goodness is that which it would be hardest to dissociate from our conception of him. All nations who have acknowledged a good and an evil power, have always regarded the evil as inferior to the good, otherwise their opinion would have been absurd. Compare this with the creed of the Savoyard clergyman later on in this book. Reason alone teaches us to know good and evil. Therefore conscience, which makes us love the one and hate the other, though it is independent of reason, cannot develop without it. Before the age of reason we do good or ill without knowing it, and there is no morality in our actions, although there is sometimes in our feeling with regard to other people's actions in relation to ourselves. A child wants to overturn everything he sees. He breaks and smashes everything he can reach, he seizes a bird as he seizes a stone, and strangles it without knowing what he is about. Why so? In the first place, philosophy will account for this by inbred sin, man's pride, love of power, selfishness, spite. Perhaps it will say in addition to this that the child's consciousness of his own weakness makes him eager to use his strength, to convince himself of it. But watch that broken down old man reduced in the downward course of life to the weakness of a child. Not only is he quiet and peaceful, he would have all about him quiet and peaceful too. The least change disturbs and troubles him, he would like to see universal calm. How is it possible that similar feebleness and similar passions should produce such different effects in age and in infancy, if the original cause were not different? And where can we find this difference in cause except in the bodily condition of the two? The active principle, common to both, is growing in one case and declining in the other, it is being formed in the one and destroyed in the other, one is moving towards life, the other towards death. The failing activity of the old man is centered in his heart, the child's overflowing activity spreads abroad. He feels, if we may say so, strong enough to give life to all about him. To make or to destroy, it is all one to him, change is what he seeks, and all change involves action. If he seems to enjoy destructive activity, it is only that it takes time to make things and very little time to break them, so that the work of destruction accords better with his eagerness. While the author of nature has given children this activity, he takes care that it shall do little harm by giving them small power to use it. But as soon as they can think of people as tools to be used, they use them to carry out their wishes and to supplement their own weakness. This is how they become tiresome, masterful, imperious, naughty, and unmanageable, a development which does not spring from a natural love of power, but one which has been taught them, for it does not need much experience to realize how pleasant it is to set others to work and to move the world by a word. As the child grows, it gains strength and becomes less restless and unquiet and more independent. Soul and body become better balanced and nature no longer asks for more movement than is required for self-preservation. But the love of power does not die with the need that aroused it, power arouses and flatters self-love, and habit strengthens it, thus caprice follows upon need, and the first seeds of prejudice and obstinacy are sown. First maxim. Far from being too strong, children are not strong enough for all the claims of nature. Give them full use of such strength as they have, they will not abuse it. Second maxim. Help them and supply the experience and strength they lack whenever the need is of the body. Third maxim. In the help you give them, confine yourself to what is really needful, without granting anything to caprice or unreason, for they will not be tormented by caprice if you do not call it into existence, seeing it is no part of nature. Fourth maxim, study carefully their speech and gestures, so that at an age when they are incapable of deceit you may discriminate between those desires which come from nature and those which spring from perversity.
You're listening Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. TheAppleClean audiobooks.
The spirit of these rules is to give children more real liberty and less power, to let them do more for themselves and demand less of others, so that by teaching them from the first to confine their wishes within the limits of their powers they will scarcely feel the want of whatever is not in their power. This is another very important reason for leaving children's limbs and bodies perfectly free, only taking care that they do not fall, and keeping anything that might hurt them out of their way. The child whose body and arms are free will certainly cry much less than a child tied up in swaddling clothes. He who knows only bodily needs, only cries when in pain, and this is a great advantage, for then we know exactly when he needs help, and if possible we should not delay our help for an instant. But if you cannot relieve his pain, stay where you are and do not flatter him by way of soothing him. Your caresses will not cure his colic, but he will remember what he must do to win them, and if he once finds out how to gain your attention at will, he is your master, the whole education is spoilt. Their movements being less constrained, children will cry less, less wearied with their tears, people will not take so much trouble to check them. With fewer threats and promises, they will be less timid and less obstinate, and will remain more nearly in their natural state. Ruptures are produced less by letting children cry than by the means taken to stop them, and my evidence for this is the fact that the most neglected children are less liable to them than others. I am very far from wishing that they should be neglected, on the contrary, it is of the utmost importance that their wants should be anticipated, so that they need not proclaim their wants by crying. But neither would I have unwise care bestowed on them. Why should they think it wrong to cry when they find they can get so much by it? When they have learned the value of their silence they take good care not to waste it. In the end they will so exaggerate its importance that no one will be able to pay its price, then worn out with crying they become exhausted, and are at length silent. Prolonged crying on the part of a child neither swaddled nor out of health, a child who lacks nothing, is merely the result of habit or obstinacy. Such tears are no longer the work of nature, but the work of the child's nurse, who could not resist its importunity and so has increased it, without considering that while she quiets the child today she is teaching him to cry louder tomorrow. Moreover, when caprice or obstinacy is the cause of their tears, there is a sure way of stopping them by distracting their attention by some pleasant or conspicuous object which makes them forget that they want to cry. Most nurses excel in this art, and rightly used it is very useful, but it is of the utmost importance that the child should not perceive that you mean to distract his attention, and that he should be amused without suspecting you are thinking about him. Now this is what most nurses cannot do. Most children are weaned too soon. The time to wean them is when they cut their teeth. This generally causes pain and suffering. At this time the child instinctively carries everything he gets hold of to his mouth to chew it. To help forward this process he is given as a plaything some hard object such as ivory or a wolf's tooth. I think this is a mistake. Hard bodies applied to the gums do not soften them, far from it, they make the process of cutting the teeth more difficult and painful. Let us always take instinct as our guide. We never see puppies practicing their budding teeth on pebbles, iron, or bones, but on wood, leather, rags, soft materials which yield to their jaws, and on which the tooth leaves its mark. We can do nothing simply, not even for our children. Toys of silver, gold, coral, cut crystal, rattles of every price and kind, what vain and useless appliances! Away with them all. Let us have no corals or rattles, a small branch of a tree with its leaves and fruit, a stick of licorice which he may suck and chew, will amuse him as well as these splendid trifles, and they will have this advantage at least, he will not be brought up to luxury from his birth. It is admitted that pap is not a very wholesome food. Boiled milk and uncooked flour cause gravel and do not suit the stomach. In pap the flour is less thoroughly cooked than in bread and it has not fermented. I think bread and milk or rice cream are better. If you will have pap, the flour should be lightly cooked beforehand. In my own country they make a very pleasant and wholesome soup from flour thus heated. Meat broth or soup is not a very suitable food and should be used as little as possible. The child must first get used to chewing his food, this is the right way to bring the teeth through, and when the child begins to swallow, the saliva mixed with the food helps digestion. I would have them first chew dried fruit or crusts. I should give them as playthings little bits of dry bread or biscuits, like the Piedmont bread, known in the country as grisses. By dint of softening this bread in the mouth some of it is eventually swallowed, the teeth come through of themselves, and the child is weaned almost imperceptibly. Peasants have usually very good digestions, and they are weaned with no more ado.
You're listening Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The AppleClean audiobooks.
From the very first children hear spoken language, we speak to them before they can understand or even imitate spoken sounds. The vocal organs are still stiff, and only gradually lend themselves to the reproduction of the sounds heard. It is even doubtful whether these sounds are heard distinctly as we hear them. The nurse may amuse the child with songs and with very merry and varied intonation, but I object to her bewildering the child with a multitude of vain words of which it understands nothing but her tone of voice. I would have the first words he hears few in number, distinctly and often repeated, while the words themselves should be related to things which can first be shown to the child. That fatal facility in the use of words we do not understand begins earlier than we think. In the schoolroom the scholar listens to the verbiage of his master as he listened in the cradle to the babble of his nurse. I think it would be a very useful education to leave him in ignorance of both. All sorts of ideas crowd in upon us when we try to consider the development of speech and the child's first words. Whatever we do they all learn to talk in the same way, and all philosophical speculations are utterly useless. To begin with, they have, so to say, a grammar of their own, whose rules and syntax are more general than our own. If you attend carefully you will be surprised to find how exactly they follow certain analogies, very much mistaken if you like, but very regular. These forms are only objectionable because of their harshness or because they are not recognized by custom. I have just heard a child severely scolded by his father for saying, Monday père, irajety. Now we see that this child was following the analogy more closely than our grammarians, for as they say to him, Vas why should he not say, irajety? Notice too the skillful way in which he avoids the hiatus in irajey or yiraje. Is it the poor child's fault that we have so unskillfully deprived the phrase of this determinative adverb y, because we did not know what to do with it? It is an intolerable piece of pedantry and most superfluous attention to detail to make a point of correcting all children's little sins against the customary expression, for they always cure themselves with time. Always speak correctly before them, let them never be so happy with anyone's with you, and be sure that their speech will be imperceptibly modeled upon yours without any correction on your part. But a much greater evil, and one far less easy to guard against, is that they are urged to speak too much, as if people were afraid they would not learn to talk of themselves. This indiscreet zeal produces an effect directly opposite to what is meant. They speak later and more confusedly. The extreme attention paid to everything they say makes it unnecessary for them to speak distinctly, and as they will scarcely open their mouths, many of them contract a vicious pronunciation and a confused speech, which last all their life and make them almost unintelligible. I have lived much among peasants, and I never knew one of them lisp, man or woman, boy or girl. Why is this? Are their speech organs differently made from our own? No, but they are differently used. There is a hillock facing my window on which the children of the place assemble for their games. Although they are far enough away, I can distinguish perfectly what they say, and often get good notes for this book. Every day my ear deceives me as to their age. I hear the voices of children of 10, I look and see the height and features of children of 3 or 4. This experience is not confined to me, The townspeople who come to see me, and whom I consult on this point, all fall into the same mistake. This results from the fact that, up to 5 or 6 children in town, brought up in a room and under the care of a nursery governess, do not need to speak above a whisper to make themselves heard. As soon as their lips move, people take pains to make out what they mean. They are taught words which they repeat inaccurately, and by paying great attention to them, the people who are always with them rather guess what they meant to say than what they said. It is quite a different matter in the country. A peasant woman is not always with her child. He is obliged to learn to say very clearly and loudly what he wants, if he is to make himself understood. Children scattered about the fields at a distance from their fathers, mothers, and other children, gain practice in making themselves heard at a distance, and in adapting the loudness of the voice to the distance which separates them from those to whom they want to speak. This is the real way to learn pronunciation, not by stammering out a few vowels into the ear of an attentive governess. So when you question a peasant child, he may be too shy to answer, but what he says distinctly, while the nurse must serve as interpreter for the town child. Without her one can understand nothing of what he is muttering between his teeth. Footnote: there are exceptions to this, and often those children who at first are most difficult to hear, become the noisiest when they begin to raise their voices. But if I were to enter into all these details, I should never make an end. Every sensible reader ought to see that defect and excess, caused by the same abuse, are both corrected by my method. I regard the two maxims as inseparable: always enough, never too much. When the first is well established, the latter necessarily follows on it.
You're listening Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The AppleClean audiobooks.
As they grow older, the boys are supposed to be cured of this fault at college, the girls in the convent schools, and indeed both usually speak more clearly than children brought up entirely at home. But they are prevented from acquiring as clear a pronunciation as the peasants. In this way, they are required to learn all sorts of things by heart, and to repeat aloud what they have learned, for when they are studying they get into the way of gabbling and pronouncing carelessly and ill. It is still worse when they repeat their lessons. They cannot find the right words, they drag out their syllables. This is only possible when the memory hesitates, the tongue does not stammer of itself. Thus they acquire or continue habits of bad pronunciation. Later on you will see that Emile does not acquire such habits, or at least not from this cause. I grant you uneducated people and villagers often fall into the opposite extreme. They almost always speak too loud, their pronunciation is too exact, and leads to rough and coarse articulation, their accent is too pronounced, they choose their expressions badly, etc. But, to begin with, this extreme strikes me as much less dangerous than the other, for the first law of speech is to make oneself understood, and the chief fault is to fail to be understood. To pride ourselves on having no accent is to pride ourselves on ridding our phrases of strength and elegance. Emphasis is the soul of speech, it gives it its feeling and truth. Emphasis deceives less than words, perhaps that is why well-educated people are so afraid of it. From the custom of saying everything in the same tone has arisen that of poking fun at people without their knowing it. When emphasis is proscribed, its place is taken by all sorts of ridiculous, affected, and ephemeral pronunciations, such as one observes especially among the young people about court. It is this affectation of speech and manner which makes Frenchmen disagreeable and repulsive to other nations on first acquaintance. Emphasis is found, not in their speech, but in their bearing. That is not the way to make themselves attractive. All these little faults of speech, which you are so afraid the children will acquire, are mere trifles. They may be prevented or corrected with the greatest ease, but the faults which are taught them when you make them speak in a low, indistinct, and timid voice, when you are always criticizing their tone and finding fault with their words, are never cured. A man who has only learned to speak in society of fine ladies could not make himself heard at the head of his troops, and would make little impression on the rabble in a riot. First teach the child to speak to men, he will be able to speak to the women when required. Brought up in all the rustic simplicity of the country, your children will gain a more sonorous voice, they will not acquire the hesitating stammer of town children, neither will they acquire the expressions nor the tone of the villagers, or if they do they will easily lose them, their master being with them from their earliest years, and more in their society the older they grow, will be able to prevent or efface by speaking correctly himself the impression of the peasant's talk. Emile will speak the purest French I know, but he will speak it more distinctly and with a better articulation than myself. The child who is trying to speak should hear nothing but words he can understand, nor should he say words he cannot articulate. His efforts lead him to repeat the same syllable as if he were practicing its clear pronunciation. When he begins to stammer, do not try to understand him. To expect to be always listened to is a form of tyranny which is not good for the child. See carefully to his real needs, and let him try to make you understand the rest. Still less should you hurry him into speech. He will learn to talk when he feels the want of it. It has indeed been remarked that those who begin to speak very late never speak so distinctly as others, but it is not because they talked late that they are hesitating. On the contrary, they began to talk late because they hesitate. If not, why did they begin to talk so late? Have they less need of speech? Have they been less urged to it? On the contrary, the anxiety aroused with the first suspicion of this backwardness leads people to tease them much more to begin to talk than those who articulated earlier, and this mistaken zeal may do much to make their speech confused, when with less haste they might have had time to bring it to greater perfection. Children who are forced to speak too soon have no time to learn either to pronounce correctly or to understand what they are made to say. While left to themselves they first practice the easiest syllables, and then, adding to them little by little some meaning which their gestures explain, they teach you their own words before they learn yours. By this means they do not acquire your words till they have understood them. Being in no hurry to use them, they begin by carefully observing the sense in which you use them, and when they are sure of them they adopt them. The worst evil resulting from the precocious use of speech by young children is that we not only fail to understand the first words they use, we misunderstand them without knowing it, so that while they seem to answer us correctly, they fail to understand us and we them. This is the most frequent cause of our surprise at children's sayings. We attribute to them ideas which they did not attach to their words. This lack of attention on our part to the real meaning which words have for children seems to me the cause of their earliest misconceptions, and these misconceptions, even when corrected, color their whole course of thought for the rest of their life. I shall have several opportunities of illustrating these by examples later on. Let the child's vocabulary, therefore, be limited. It is very undesirable that he should have more words than ideas, that he should be able to say more than he thinks. One of the reasons why peasants are generally shrewder than townsfolk is, I think, that their vocabulary is smaller. They have few ideas, but those few are thoroughly grasped. The infant is progressing in several ways at once. He is learning to talk, eat, and walk about the same time. This is really the first phase of his life. Up till now, he was little more than he was before birth. He had neither feeling nor thought, he was barely capable of sensation, he was unconscious of his own existence.
You just heard Emile by Jean-Jacques Rousseau. The AppleClean audiobooks.